Thank you so much for staying with us. Moving on to the focus for today, UNESCO is dedicating the International Day of Education, celebrated on 24th January 2024, to the crucial role education and teachers play in countering hate speech, a phenomenon which has snowballed in recent years with the use of social media, damaging the fabric of our societies. The theme of the 2024 celebration is learning for lasting peace. The thought behind this theme has been explained by the UNESCO as the world is seeing a surge of violent conflicts paralleled by an alarming rise of discrimination, racism, xenophobia, and hate speech. The impact of this violence transcends many boundaries based on geography, gender, race, religion, politics, offline and online. And to have this conversation with us is Gideon Adeni. He is the spokesperson for CAPA. CAPA stands for Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa. Hi Gideon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me this morning.
Okay, let us delve into it this way. First of all, education in Nigeria has, gone through a lot. Education in Nigeria is like someone who hasn't, been loved in a long time, and they're currently asking themselves if they're hunger. That was on a lighter note. But of course, today is dedicated to education worldwide. And UNESCO usually dedicates today, January 24th, to the crucial role that education and teachers are playing to countering hate speech. I know that you are burning with where we stopped off the last time that you were here as regards education in Nigeria. But while we look at the state of education generally, and when we kind of put hate speech behind it, how has it been affected? And what are some let's take a look at some of the innovative ways that education has thrived lately. Let us stay away from the negatives for now and try to appreciate what we have, how far we've come, and where we're going to. So let me get your reaction to the innovative ways that you think education has been thriving for a while now.
Thank you once again for having me. I think we should begin by commending the idea of having a day dedicated to celebrating or reminding ourselves the importance of education. UNESCO said that this day is dedicated to remind ourselves that education has to be a public good, not a commodity that should be exchanged on the basis of who can afford and who can. So I think that is something to be appreciated, even though education is something that we ought to celebrate every day. I do say that the same way water and food is to the body is the way that education is to the society. So to your question in how the innovative ways that education is expanding, I think the advancement of digital technology has been quite helpful in expanding access to education. And by education, I do not only mean what we do in the four walls of the classroom, but the exchange of knowledge, the development of the human mind. So the internet, the digital media is helping so much to bridge the gap, to increase access to education, but of course a lot still has to be done to bring the access to millions of people in Nigeria and across the globe.
All right, so let us bring it home now. Thank you so much for your submission. So let us bring it home to the challenges that has been faced by the Nigerian educational system, or should I say educational sector. The last time you were here, we were talking about government approach to issues as it concerns education, and we were looking at the budget implementation towards education and how much we're hoping to get for the 2024 national budget. It has been released, and we all see what we are getting as regards education. How do you react to that, and does this add to the challenge that we already are facing?
I wanted to start with the analogy that you used when you started, but I can't remember it exactly. But I'm just saying that obviously education has suffered a great neglect in our country, and more so since the beginning of the present democratic dispensation in 1999. Budgetary allocation to education, I'm not sure it has gone past 10% at 10 points, even though UNESCO recommends between 15 and 20%, and we have always repeated that, I mean, for developing country like Nigeria. I remember during the last time that I came, we were discussing how the Tinubu administration was promising to put in 25% budgetary allocation into the education sector, and I expressed my doubt, my skepticism that was possible. And now we have seen the 2024 budget. I think as at the last report I read, it's about 6.39%. That's the allocation to education now, and what the government is promising to do is to get 1% of the revenue from custom, 1% from immigration, and so forth. Federal Land Revenue Service, and put into what they call the student loan fund, in which they are promised to put 10 billion naira now. But when you look at 10 billion naira compared to how much report have suggested that we need, we see that it's just too meager. I mean, like the HASU report of I can't remember the exact years now, but 30 years ago says that we need about 1.3 trillion naira. Now when you put 10 billion beside 1.3 trillion, it's going nowhere. The report had recommended that we should put in about 200 billion, sorry, every year, so that over a period of about 6 years we'll have covered the 1.3 trillion naira needed. But now the government is promising us 10 billion for student loan fund. 10 billion, how many 10 billion makes 1.3? So you see that the pace at which we are moving towards the adequate funding of education is too slow, and of course something drastic has to be done.
Okay, so looking at what you've just said now, and seeing the body language, and of course the actions that have been put side by side with their spoken words, do you ever think that we're going to get to a point where they would prioritize education so much so that we will go above, if more than even 10% of what is required to be able to fund education? That's number one. Number two, talking about digitalizing education, we know that this is just peculiar to people living in the urban areas, the city. What about those in the rural area? Are you saying they are also taking advantage of digitalization to be able to enhance themselves educationally, considering how much expensive data is in Nigeria?
To the first question about whether it's possible for the government to prioritize education so much anytime soon, what we have seen in recent times does not suggest that we are likely to see the level of prioritization of education that we want to see.
This is a new administration, by the way.
Yes, but the new administration spent 3 billion naira or so taking over 400 persons to COP in Dubai, right? The new administration spent about 5 billion, over 5 billion, or going to 6 billion on the presidential yacht, though they started arguing that it has been approved before now, right? The same administration is allocating 6.39 or so percent to education. So the body language is already suggesting that the same profligacy of the ruling elite is going to continue. It's continuing, not even going to continue.
How about the statement given by Blinken applauding Tinubu of his policies? Are you not seeing any light in that? The international community could be saying something positive while we're here looking at it from the negative, perhaps casting aspersion on certain things that have been done in recent past, and now thinking that there isn't going to be any way forward.
The problem that we have in Nigeria today, some scholars have traced it to the structural adjustment program of the 70s. These were programs recommended and put to us by the World Bank, the IMF and Co. So when you adopt such policies, of course, they give you kudos. they hail you for it, but then the people at the country level feel the brunt of it, of policies that are anti-poor. They will hail you, of course, but the people feel the brunt. There is increasing poverty in our country. There is growing inequality. Nigeria is we have one of the highest number of out of school children now. I think about 20-something% of children between the ages of go to 30%, between the ages of 4 and 19 are out of school. So if the president is being applauded, but the reality on the ground shows that we are not making significant progress, do you think as an advocate for education rights, as an advocate for human rights, should also applaud him? I will not.
So talking about the rural areas.
The rural areas,
yeah.
I think digital technology is spreading quite fast. I think the potential to ensure that we can take access to education using the opportunity that the digital media provides is there. But of course, a lot still has to be done to make it affordable, like you noted, to make it affordable to people in the rural areas.
Coverage-wise?
Coverage too, you know. I think that what we cannot afford to do is to just leave it to private corporations, again, who are usually concerned about interest first. And many a times it is not as profitable to invest in those areas.
Really?
Like it is to invest in urban areas, you know, because of the agglomeration of people that you have in urban centers. A single communication infrastructure can serve millions and millions of people that will bring more profit, unlike what you have in rural areas. So it will require that it has to be government investment, direct government investment in providing this digital infrastructure so that we can now harness it to increase access to education.
So what do you think your advocacy could do in that regard, especially looking at it that these corporations are interest driven, so they might likely not go towards the direction. Now, what is your advocacy doing to really mount pressure on the government, those who are responsible with making sure that telecommunication, I'm looking at NCC right now, to be able to put their mass in such areas so that telecommunication can be able to thrive in that area, to encourage those at that grassroots level to be able to embrace education via digitalization?
I think the response is connected to what we have always said, that education first has to be seen as a public good. Like I said,
not commercialized.
No, not commercialized. We have to, like I said earlier, you have to see education as the food that you use to develop the body. You get the same way food is to the body, so is education to the society. You want to develop human mind, you need education. So with that, we can see that investment in digital infrastructure that can ensure that rural areas have access to education using this digital technology has to be public driven.
All right, from your last submission about how the education should generally be focused for public good, this year's International Day of Education, according to UNESCO, is themed, learning for lasting peace, and that kind of goes around some of the issues that we have seen recently, and in explaining that UNESCO is saying that the world has seen a surge of violence, conflict, and in a country like America we've seen a lot of school shooting. Even here in Nigeria we've heard a lot of kind of violence here and there happening among school children and all that. And according to the UNESCO recommendation on education for peace, human rights and sustainable development, learning for peace must be transformative and help to empower learners with necessary knowledge, values, attitude, skills and behaviors. And of course these things should be agents to drive peace. And like you mentioned, education should also impact the development of the human mind. We as Nigerians find ourselves at a point where we're battling to even have standing school structures, standing classrooms. proper boards to write on, and access to technology to help the children study regular school curriculum. How then do we begin to imbibe all these other recommendations that are coming from UNESCO when we already are suffering from neglect, like you mentioned, in the education sector? How do you see us being able to meet up to this world standard?
I think what we have to do first is to recognize education as a strong pillar for peace building, as UNESCO is doing. You want to build peace. You want to build a peaceful society. You have to prioritize education, and not just the kind of education that you get in the four walls of classrooms, but lifelong education, so that the average taxi driver must have the opportunity to be part of forum where they reflect on our collective reality. I do say that as long as the worker has to work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. only to return to his room tired and exhausted, and no time to be part of maybe an education club or a movie club or a literary club, then we are not having the kind of education that we need. So we have to prioritize education, and our definition of education must go beyond primary, secondary, and tertiary education to lifelong learning. Like I said earlier, we have to see education as a prerequisite for peace building, so that again it must be seen as a public good.
All right, it's International Day for education everywhere. Now let's even go back to the tertiary education in Nigeria. Looking at the student loan, by virtue of that, what you just said is already been taken off when it comes to the common good, because you're saying that education should be accessible and almost free to every Nigerian, giving them
Almost free.
Okay, let me use the word free because I was a bit modest. Now, by virtue of the student loan, it means that an average Nigerian might not be able to afford education. So what it means is that if you cannot afford education, then embrace student loan, right? Now, the modalities around it is totally out of this world, considering what comes with it. Your parents should be civil servants who have been able to work a certain period and be able to save a certain amount of money at the end of each year to be able to afford it for you. How many persons have their parents as civil servants? That's one. Number two, what do you subscribe? If student loan to you might seem like commercializing education, do you subscribe for grant or what's it called, scholarship? And if you subscribe for that, what is your advocacy doing to be able to push that conversation so as to get the visibility that it should, so that we can begin to look towards that direction as against student loan?
To answer the first question about the proportion of Nigerian students, tertiary education or university students who will be able to access the loan, I think the answer is also obvious. Since the pronouncement of the scheme, you've seen an astronomical rise in school fees across campuses from Unilag. I remember we're part of the advocacy at Unilag to several other schools across the country, so Uni Abuja and so on and so forth. And while this school fees is being increased, the number of, when you check the patria amount that is being put into the student loan fund, you see it's so small, so that the number of people will be able to access it will be minimal, very small. Whereas the school fees is going high, so that many people can no longer afford it. So that when you check, those who will be left able to afford it, either by getting the loan or whose parents can afford it, they will be very small. As well as estimated that about 50% of students will have to drop out of universities if school fees keep rising like this, and then the student loan is being put as the solution to the astronomical rise in fees, so that ultimately it is not a solution to the problem that we have. And I've always jokingly say that they are simply dancing around the issue. The ultimate solution is to fund education properly. So they are not willing to fund education adequately, and then they begin to bring all sort of unworkable solutions and code. And to the second question, please remind me again.
Yeah, I was about going to tell you the second question, but then again, let me also remind you that your colleague was here a while ago, some time ago, and of course published a book, which of course you were part of that team that spoke vehemently about the student loan. In fact, tagging it a scam.
Yes.
Now, so since you are looking at it that this was not what will meet the needs of Nigerians, what do you suggest as regards grants? Is it something that is doable? Is it feasible? And of course, is it achievable?
Of course, it is very achievable. Many of our parents went to school on grants and scholarships outside Nigeria. That fund, which is presently providing some grants and scholarships, even though to a very small number of education seekers, is currently in crisis. I read a report recently where Tech Fund was saying that many of those that they send abroad do not return, and now they are putting pressure on the guarantors. And again, if guarantors of scholarships and grants issued by Tech Fund are having such problem, imagine what will happen to loan guarantors. So that's just something for us to think about. But what I'm saying essentially is that the issue of suggesting that the loan should be turned to grant is not something new. We have had grants and scholarships in Nigeria before. I have benefited from some sort of little scholarship.
But that is not without his talent too.
The only problem is whether the government is willing to fund it. And we have been saying, and I'm sure my colleagues have said here severally too, that if we are willing to cut the profligacy of the political elites, when you check how much they're spending on renovating the presidential lodge, how much is being spent on yachts, how much is being spent on travel expenses and the likes of the ruling elite, how much the very small, less than 1%, less than maybe 0.01%, how many are they in the National Assembly? How many are they? The president, the vice president, and co. How many are they? If you check how much they're spending annually, I've mentioned some. About 400 of them went to Dubai and they spent 3 billion. And then you expect how many students to share 10 billion naira in a year? How many millions of students? When you put it side by side, you see that the only challenge is whether we are willing to cut the profligacy of the political elites.
All right, quickly as we round off, thank you so much for your submissions, by the way. But in 1999, as we successfully got into the democracy as a people, part of the policies that was established at the time was the UBE, the Universal Basic Education, that was supposed to ensure the quality of basic education in Nigeria, and of course free of cost. I'm talking from daycare to primary, secondary education that I am sure of. But it's looking like we're even losing or lost grip of that as well, and then you don't want to get into the very chaotic conversation of the tertiary institutions. But since we're talking education generally today and we're not focusing on tertiary education, and we're bringing it home to Nigeria, how effective do you think the UBE has been? I mean, with this space of over 26 years that it has been in action. At some point it was everywhere in the news. There were exercise books and pen and pencils imprinted with UBE. It was huge. I benefited from it a lot. I can't even take that away. But after a while, it died down. And there are people who still sit in UBE offices till today, claiming to be in service, while we barely get, the effect of what these services are supposed to be. So how effective would you say the UBE had been from inception to now?
The UBE Act, I think, was enacted in 2004. That's about 2 decades ago. And like you said, when it started, there was lots of funding. But I think the question to ask ourselves now is, how many of us have our children in public primary schools? How many of us want to have our children there? And then what has happened to the number of out-of-school children in our country? I mentioned that we have about close to 30% of children out of school now. So the number is growing. If the UBE Act was performing, if the intention to ensure that there is universal access to basic education was being fulfilled, the number ought to be reducing. But we're seeing the reverse, meaning that the intention of the act is not being achieved, and that tells us that we are really retrogressing so much, especially in terms of fulfilling the people's right to education, so that even basic education now is now a big challenge for many. I mean, access to basic education. You realize that people now pay exorbitantly, even in millions, for basic primary education. Now you hear people in primary schools paying millions of naira, I mean, school fees. And if you are not willing to pay that, when you go to public schools, the quality of what you have is not there. So that the universal access to education now has become almost non-existent in our country.
All right, thank you so much, Gideon, for your submissions and giving us your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course, this conversation around education is ever unfolding. This is January. Sometime in October, November, the president went ahead to say that the student loan bill was going to go ahead. He was going to go ahead and implement it by January 2024. We haven't really heard anything about that.
The last we heard was that it is now to be expanded to include artisans. And for that to happen, lawyers have said it has to be taken back to the National Assembly to be amended and all of that. So definitely the implementation cannot start again this January.
Which also means that, you know, it's going to unfold eventually. Yeah. Where I was going to with that is that we hope to see you again as it unfolds.
I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
iBrand, then break. It is the Wednesday edition, and we're not done with you yet. When we return, there will be more conversations coming your way. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us.